Next up, we have Leo Chenal, the linebacker out of Wisconsin, who, for me, was an interesting guy because, as you guys will see on the screen, I wasn't a huge fan of him, particularly on my grading scale. The way I have graded all these linebacker prospects, Leo Chenal just, as I was going through, waiting for him to check some boxes, I just thought a lot of them were half checked. I would almost say, he was the type of guy that had no overwhelming weaknesses, but I also didn't necessarily think he had any over the top strengths, which is interesting because you look at what he did, I should say, in terms of his combine performance. Just for example, he had in terms of the 40-yard dash, 4.53 40, 4.24 shuttle, a 6.98 3 cone, a 40.5-inch vertical, a 10-foot 8-inch broad, a 34 reps on bench press, all at 6'2.5", 250 pounds. So one of the best combine performances by a linebacker in the history of the combine, right? And with that being said, I didn't particularly see that on film, and I know that doesn't sound good. I know a lot of people might be scratching their head because he was rather he was decently productive in terms of some of his counting stats. He had 100 plus tackles. He had I believe it was 8.5 sacks, which partially is why I gave him one of the best grades I gave him category wise was finishing and tackling. But in that regard, I thought he had real good closing speed and good power and strength behind him to wrap up and bring guys down. However, past that, there were just a lot of areas that kind of left me scratching my head because I'm watching his range and pursuit, for example, which I grade out of 15 points, and I really didn't see it on, especially like a sideline to sideline basis. And maybe that's maybe the sideline to sideline speed incorporates more lateral agility than it does straight line 40 speed like Chenal had with his 4.53. But I mean, he didn't test bad in agility measures either. So it's just kind of strange to me how the guy I saw on film seems different from the guy that I saw in Indianapolis. And in that regard, I gave him a 9 out of 15. In terms of coverage skills, he's a bigger, thicker guy. Like I said, 6'2". He was listed at 260 last season, came in at the combine at 250, so maybe he did cut a little bit of weight. I'm not 100% sure, but I didn't think he was overwhelmingly fluid or flexible in terms of turning and going and running with guys in coverage. Maybe some shallow zones would be fine. I mean, he's not like incompetent or anything. I don't want you guys to think that. I still have a 4th round grade on him, right? But I didn't quite think I saw a ton of ability there, and maybe he'll match up a little bit better if a team like purposefully matches him with opposing tight ends, for instance, or somebody that matches his sort of physical profile. But I don't necessarily think he should be covering running backs or slot receivers or anybody like that by a long shot at the next level. I thought one of his better traits was his block shedding ability, just because how strong he could be on contact. But I will say, I wanted a little bit more. Like, he just left me wanting more in terms of, there would be reps where he'd go shock the blocker, have good hand usage, disengage, and make a play. And I really liked a lot of those reps. I just need to see him more frequently. I think that's where he's probably going to make his money at the next level, and it just didn't happen on as frequent enough basis. There were some plays where it frankly looked like he was avoiding contact purposely. And I can't imagine that'd be the case. Why would you do that if you're such an athletic guy? It just seemed a little bit strange. But I mean, there were plays where he gave up gap control in lieu of taking on a guy, and I mean that's just not that's just not what you're looking for, in my opinion. Another lower grade that I gave him, quickness and change of direction. I gave him a 6.5. I thought that was one of his. It's not a bad grade by any means. It's kind of right in line with some other guys in the class. But again, it was another grade I didn't see akin to his combine performance. To me, he looked like the type of guy that if his first read wasn't the correct one, then he was almost out of the play, because by the time he would reverse field, change direction, and go chase it down, he was out of it. So I wasn't fully sold on his quickness and change of direction. Although I will say the IQ and awareness I thought was fine. I gave him a 10.25. Out of 15. Sometimes he would be a little bit slow and hesitant on some reads, and maybe that was just overemphasized considering he was playing next to Jack Sanborn, who's another draftable prospect who, from the little bit that I watched, I didn't fully grade him, but he certainly seemed like he was he was getting to plays a little bit quicker in terms of the, his read steps. He was processing things quicker. That's just what it looked like to me. It seemed like, from my perspective, Leo was this physical freak with athletic intangibles in terms of at least the testing measurables. This weight room warrior, we'll just say. And it seemed like the guy he was playing next to was a little bit more refined as a prospect right away. So now, what does that mean for the next level in terms of Chenal? It means that all the stuff that I'm kind of talking down on him on, to a degree, are somewhat coachable, right? I mean, I would say that you can teach him to, not give up gap control. You can teach him how to be a little bit more effective in terms of his coverage ability. As long as all those athletic, traits persist and they start to show up on Sundays, then, I mean, why couldn't he? Why couldn't he, start to read plays a little bit quicker, read his keys more thoroughly, etc., things like that. There's really no reason to. So if you have a guy with great size and great athletic intangibles, like I said, even though I maybe didn't see them, if they're there, then, let's see what he has to offer. For me, my grade, it's a confidence level in terms of where I would feel comfortable taking them, and he has a lot of room for growth, in my opinion. But if you have a lot of room for growth, it means there's also a chance that you don't grow, right? There's a chance that if there's a ton of potential, there's also potential that you never achieve that. And I think a lot of people who are talking about him in round 1 and round 2, they're just seeing something else than I am. I know a lot of people, they really like him as a blitzer, and I agree with that. The problem is I don't necessarily know how much blitzing in the fashion that he did it, I don't necessarily know how much talent that takes. I think that's more of a drive and want to and a schematic thing. I would say that blitzing of, the range and pursuit, the coverage ability, the shedding inside and making plays against the run, I think blitzing far and away comes after all of those things. So yeah, he had 8.5 sacks, which is great, but how many of those are schemed up versus how many are actually like clean wins that he's dominating a blocker? I don't quite know, because I didn't really see it. I saw a guy that was able to finish on some plays, execute well at times, like what the scheme was leading him into in terms of like various twists and stunts and stuff and delayed blitzes. I thought that was all fine and dandy, but overall, I just didn't quite see it with Chenal. So I know I'm probably making a fan base mad here in terms of I'm assuming he goes on day 2 at this point. I can't imagine that he'll go in round 4, but personally, that's where I would feel comfortable taking him as of right now. Like I said, tons of development that could occur, but if it doesn't, then I'd be afraid that we're left with just a physical freak that didn't pan out. Now, there is a chance, depending on what scheme he goes into, there's a chance that maybe the role he gets put into could change his effectiveness. I think that he's probably best suited to be a 4-3 Sam linebacker. That was my initial thought, because that way, some of the IQ and awareness stuff, it's not nearly as important, I don't think, as it is strictly at middle linebacker. And from what I could tell, Jack Sanborn seemed to be the middle linebacker that was calling the shots at Wisconsin. I wouldn't want Leo Chenal in that role just all of a sudden now. I would want him to clean up some of the other stuff before we start adding more to his plate. So I would say a 4-3 Sam linebacker, or the secondary 3-4 inside linebacker. And you could argue, hey, give him some reps off the edge occasionally. I'd be cool with that. I might rather have him blitzing than back in coverage, but I think there's a lot of guys who could be as productive as him as a blitzer if you're drawing stuff up for him. So in that regard, I know I just made a whole fan base mad, but personally, I don't know what to tell you guys. These were just my observations, my thoughts, and how he filled out on my grading scale. He was kind of middle of the pack in terms of the linebackers that I graded this year. So yeah, I'm hoping for the best for Chenal. I know some people are comparing him to like Luke Kuechly. I personally don't see that, but I certainly hope that's what he becomes, because like I said, the tools seem to be there. The tools seem to be there, potentially. I just don't know if he's playing up to the level that those tools suggest. And I guess one other reason for that, one other question that I wrote in my notes was about his motor. And maybe it's a motor thing. Maybe the reason I thought he didn't look like as good of an athlete was because he just wasn't giving 100% of his effort. That's possible. And then all those little small categories where I was, docking him, maybe it all comes back to motor. And then you'd say, well, maybe he's a third round guy on my scale, right? But regardless, for me, I don't think I'm quite in round 2 with Mr. Chenal, no matter what, right? And even if it is motor, that's a serious concern too, because, why are you not applying yourself in that regard? Are you kind of loafing because you have a guy next to you that you can rely on to make plays in Sanborn? I don't know. It was just a weird dynamic and interesting how much he's risen through the process. Although with those measurables and that combine performance, I get it. So if you get where I'm coming from, though, even though we might not necessarily agree, if you kind of see what I'm saying, when you put on the film, I'm sure he has a great highlight tape. Don't get me wrong. Maybe people love him because of that. Problem is, I don't watch highlight tapes. I watch full games, and out of the 250, 300 snaps that I saw of Chenal, I just wasn't necessarily overwhelmingly impressed. So if you've watched snaps of Chenal, tell me what your thoughts are below. I'd be curious to hear what you think of him in terms of where he ends up going. Even obviously, I don't know at the same time you do, but I will be curious. What your thoughts are if you are a fan of that team. So with that being said, that is all I have for you guys today officially. I'll see you guys next video. Peace, guys.